It's an understatement that not every game that comes out is a financial success, though the situation can be so bad that the studio developing the game has to close its doors. In this video, we will show you some awful games, but also a few that were actually pretty good. However, all developers went out of business after or even before the release of the games. Here are 10 games that killed their studio. The German-American studio Factor 5 has a legendary status when it comes to developing games. Many gamers fondly think back to Rogue Squadron games, but also the Turrican series that made our hearts beat faster. After 4 successful Star Wars flight action games, Factor 5 developed Lair for the PlayStation 3. The game uses the 6-axis motion controls to control the flying dragons in the game. Unfortunately, this made the game nearly unplayable. After a few patches, Factor 5 solved the problem and a decent game rose from the ashes. But it was too little too late. It took another few years before Factor 5 closed down completely, after an unknown project for the defunct publisher Brash Entertainment fell through.
Those Mokai will learn not to attack us!
A few game designers from Rare decided to start their own studio to develop a GoldenEye-inspired FPS. That game was Time Splitters, and despite the fact that this PS2 title wasn't a huge hit, it got a sequel that exceeded all expectations. After the cult hit Second Sight, the third game in the series, Future Perfect, was an even bigger success, and everybody thought the studio was here to stay. Though its next game was a futuristic shooter for the PlayStation 3 called Haze. That didn't impress gamers at all. The game sported the Nectar system that was more annoying than useful.
Nectar. It made me feel invincible. But for every high, there's a low.
After the Battlefront 3 fiasco, Free Radical became Crytek UK and started working on the Crysis series. We're afraid and sad that we'll never see a Time Splitters sequel again. Core Design was a legendary game studio that will always be remembered for the creation of the Tomb Raider franchise. However, this franchise also became its swan song. In the early 2000s, after Lara's 5th game, Core Design tried to revitalize the series by creating a reboot. This was the disappointing Angel of Darkness for the PlayStation 2 and PC. The game was full of bugs, but also featured a second playable character, a man called Curtis Trent. Curtis was a boring character, and definitely not the reason to buy the game. The players wanted a good Lara Croft game, but they didn't get it. The sales were so disastrous that Core Design only developed 2 minor titles for the PSP before closing its doors for good. Man, do we miss the MotorStorm series. On the PlayStation 3, there really wasn't a better arcade racing series. But also, the WRC series they developed was a blast to play.
4, jump, onto right 3, hard brake, 4, danger!
However, when the PlayStation 4 launched, Evolution developed a launch title called Drive Club. The realistic race game wasn't that bad, but it launched pretty broken.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's such a thrill for a studio to be asked to help define new PlayStation technology so that we can finally bring our vision for team-based racing to life.
After a few updates, Sony decided to close Evolution, which is a real shame. Anyway, by making a VR version of Drive Club, Sony somehow paid tribute to Evolution Studios for its work, so it wasn't all for nothing. Canadian studio Radical Entertainment has been around for over a decade. developing hits like The Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction, The Simpsons Hit and Run, a decent Scarface game, and Prototype. All great games that we fondly remember, but unfortunately, it got a sequel that didn't fare so well.
Okay, press the alternate key. ALT alternate.
Alt? There's no fucking alt. I got a fucking squiggly line key. I got a fucking key with a triangle on it. What the fuck kind of keyboard is this anyway?
The game was pretty good, but it only sold just under 1 million copies in the first weeks. As a result of these sales, Radical Entertainment had to significantly reduce their staff. A few months later, in 2012, the studio had to close its doors. Such a shame, because the Prototype games deserve better than the lackluster remasters they got a while ago.
Track is rigged and ready.
BlackRock Studio was a British studio that was acquired by Buena Vista Games in 2006. Before this period, the studio developed a huge amount of racing games, like the ATV Off-Road Fury series. Under the helm of Disney, BlackRock debuted with Pure, a brilliant off-road racer that was probably the best of its generation. Pure didn't receive a follow-up, but it was succeeded by Split Second, a great game with spectacular destruction that was supposed to get a sequel. However, Disney Interactive Studios quickly reduced their activity in the video game industry, and BlackRock Studios was left alone and forced to close down. A new Split Second would be nice to see though. So who is going to snap up the rights to develop a sequel? Guys, anyone? Lionhead Studios is another British studio that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. Helmed by Peter Molyneux, the studio often had ambitious ideas about their games that in the end led to a lot of disappointment. The studio is widely known for its Fable and Black and White franchises, but is infamous for the amount of cancelled games it worked on over the years. Unity, BC, Fable Legends, and Milo and Kate are just a few of the projects that didn't make their way to store shelves.
This is the first time that thousands of people are going to see this.
Thousands of people?
Here we're seeing Claire being recognised, and the emotion in Claire's voice being recognised, and that emotion reflecting in Milo's face.
Fable Legends, the studio's last project, was actually in beta for a while when Microsoft decided to cancel the project and close Lionhead Studios. We are very sad that the excellent Fable series ended on such a low note. Chaos Studios existed for 5 years and only made 2 games, but we believe this studio was a promising one. Its first game, Frontline's Fuel of War, was a pretty decent game featuring massive online battles on the Xbox 360 and PC. It was a moderate success for the now defunct THQ, and Chaos got permission to develop a new game. That game became Homefront, and despite the fact that it was a little short and contained a few bugs, it still was a blast to play.
Shut that baby up!
It also was one of the few games that didn't play it safe and caused some controversy because of the political story it told. The game got mixed reviews, and despite THQ's demise, it got a sequel made by Crytek UK that was pretty terrible.
Wait!
Want more Zoomin Games awesomeness? Find all of it before anyone else, only in our app. Discounts, rewards, and competitions await you. Links below. Sony Liverpool, formerly known as Psychosis, was a British studio that existed for almost 30 years. The studio developed series like Lemmings, Destruction Derby, and Wipeout. These awesome franchises still couldn't save Sony Liverpool from closure though. During the last years of its existence, the studio was smaller than ever and only focused on developing games in the futuristic racing series Wipeout. Shortly after the release of Wipeout 2048 for the PS Vita, Sony decided to close the Liverpool branch. It's unknown if we'll ever see a Wipeout again, but it definitely won't be developed by Sony Liverpool. Bizarre Creations was yet another brilliant British development studio responsible for successful franchises like Project Gotham Racing and Geometry Wars. The studio specialized in racing games, but also developed other types of games like The Club, Fur Fighters, and James Bond 007 Bloodstone. The latter one was unfortunately the last game the studio made, because it was a huge disappointment and didn't sell a lot of copies. Bizarre's penultimate game, Blur, also wasn't a huge hit. Though we do have fond memories of Blur and the PGR franchise, we do hope to see a spiritual successor to both titles when the time is right. Which studio closure bummed you out the most? Let us know in the comments, and please like this video and subscribe to our channel.